Dr. Richard Turcsányi and dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to our very special webinar on China's soft power in Europe and beyond. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and a world free from conflict. We envision a world where sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented or resolved, and peace is advocated. China Studies is one of a major research center. China Studies as a whole brings into perspective the rising powers mounting economic, military, and diplomatic cloud that certainly has the aptitude to either overturn or sustain the current contemporary world order. The center broadly examines China's international strategic thinking and conduct foreign and security policy and the impact of domestic politics and economy on China's foreign relations. We have been holding regular interaction on China with experts from around the world. To talk on a very interesting topic of today, we have very distinguished scholar, Dr. Richard Q. Turcsányi. Dr. Richard Turcsányi is a Deputy Director of Institute of Asian Studies and Director of Strategic Policy Institute, both in Bratislava. Besides, he is an assistant professor at Mendel University in Brno and Associate Fellow at Institute of International Relations, Prague. He received his Ph.D. in International Relations from Masaryk University, where he also studied economy and political science. In past, he conducted a long-term study and research at University of Toronto, Peking University, National Chengchi University in Taipei, and European Institute of Asian Studies in Brussels. Richard has a broad experience with learning on international relations, security, and economic issues of Central Europe and East Asia. In his academic research, he focused mostly on Central Europe's relation with East Asia and Chinese foreign policy. Dr. Richard, we welcome you once again to our program. Kindly make your presentation around 30, 35, or maybe 40 minutes, which will be followed by question and answers. The program is streaming live on several Facebook pages and other platforms. We'd like to request all our participants to drop their questions on Zoom chat or on the Facebook Live. You can also tweet or WhatsApp if you like. Richard, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see me and hear me. It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation and for very nice introduction. It's a big shame that I cannot visit, but at least I'm very happy we can be in touch over the internet. So I really like that I have this opportunity to present you results of some of my research. And just to repeat what I said a few minutes ago, that the presentation will be primarily about Chinese soft power in Europe, but I'll be very happy in the discussion also we can touch upon other regions. Of course, I'm very interested in how you perceive this in Nepal or wherever you are in South Asia or beyond. So please don't feel limited to Europe or to soft power for that matter. So let me share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, I hope you see my screen, and let me go for that.
Yes, it's perfect. We can.
Thank you. So in this presentation, I'm not presenting just a single paper of mine. I'm presenting kind of results of more research and more papers. So it's a bit of an eclectic presentation. And of course, what we are looking at now, this is the result of a Pew Research Center, so who organizes surveys of public opinion and who ask about how China is perceived. So these tables show favorable and unfavorable views of China. We look mainly at kind of Western countries, so European countries, but we also have here Japan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, US. Basically, what we see here is that in recent years, the Western countries became decisively negative about China. And in a way, in this presentation, I want to talk a bit about why that happened, but also I want to show that maybe at some points of time, Chinese public diplomacy or soft power attempts actually were successful to some extent at least. So I hope you see the next slide, 3 eras under discussion. So we are now in the 3rd era, which I titled with the marking as the Chinese influence, so-called Chinese influence, which roughly we can say started around 2018. And in this era, as I showed you, the image of China, especially in the West, got very negative. But before that, we can identify 2 other eras, which I also studied so I published a book titled Chinese Assertiveness in the South China Sea. And in that book, I looked at especially the era around 2008, 2012, up to 2015. And in this first era, international audience started to discuss that China is becoming assertive. So I'll show you soon what I found about that. And then in the 2nd era, we can basically call it Belt and Road Initiative. Obviously, you're familiar with that. I published a paper on how Belt and Road Initiative impacted China's soft power in Europe. And in a way, I will argue and show you that initially, at least, over first 4 years or so, Chinese public diplomacy can be regarded as successful in Europe. So maybe this is good to keep in mind that the image of China changes in the time depending on various aspects. And so what are these aspects? What drive European attitudes of China? So firstly, obviously it is Chinese behavior. So it is Chinese foreign policy. It is also Chinese public diplomacy. So what China does in kind of the foreign policy. So for instance, South China Sea, East China Sea, and so on and so on, but also how it engages maybe public. So Chinese public diplomacy is very active. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Journalists, researchers, all have a lot of opportunities to travel to China, meet Chinese colleagues, and so on. So that's part of Chinese public diplomacy. Chinese narratives are also sort of part of public diplomacy. And then also what is definitely influencing and is part of Chinese behavior is what's going on in China. This is especially important in the West. So the issues of human rights, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, these issues have been very dominant in driving how the West perceives China recently. It's not just what China is doing, but the Chinese actions somehow fall within certain contexts. So I'm based in the Czech Republic. Czech Republic has very specific attitudes towards China, and these are very different from the German attitudes, or from Spanish, or from Swedish and Greek, and so on. So in a way, China can be doing the same thing, but these can be perceived differently in different countries. Obviously, if we go even beyond Europe, that would be yet different. So I assume things which might be perceived positive in Europe can be perceived negative in Nepal, and vice versa. So that's something we can discuss later on. Obviously, bilateral relations influence how China is perceived. So if there are tensions, that likely would have negative impact on how China is perceived. And finally, broader international context play a role. So, for instance, again, I'm based in Central Europe. Russia is very often perceived very negatively. Now, if China is perceived as being too close to Russia, then this also influences the perception of China. So, in fact, in the Czech Republic, China is very often perceived as kind of too close to Russia and being like the two authoritarian powers which we should be watching. Now, this is how it is perceived here. I'm just paraphrasing. So to move on to the first era from the 3, so about 10, 13 years ago, there was a new discussion about Chinese foreign policy. Just to remind you, during 90s, during 2000s, Chinese foreign policy was mainly following what Deng Xiaoping suggested should be the low-profile diplomacy. So the Chinese diplomacy was usually trying to stay away from troubles. It tried not to provoke any controversies. In particular, it didn't confront the US or the Western countries. It wanted to stay out of troubles, have good relations, mainly because they expected this would help for their economic development. Now, with the time going, with the Chinese economy, China becoming more powerful and so on, China was becoming more confident. And in particular, after the global financial crisis, 2008, there was really some kind of a first moment when probably many in China thought that, okay, now is the time. We don't need to keep low profile. We can start acting in a much more, assertive way. So that's where the meme, so to say, the discourse on Chinese assertiveness came. And really China started to be called that China's acting assertively, especially in territorial disputes. So the South China Sea, East China Sea, but also in relation to Taiwan, the borders with India, and so on and so on. What is interesting is that as other colleagues, Ian Johnston from Harvard, Björn Jordan from Stockholm showed, in fact, there was not so much of a change in Chinese foreign policy. In a way, it was largely a change in discourse and not so much change in the actual foreign policy. Johnston said that because of kind of the media think tanks, they were driving on this China hype. Jordan also shows how knowledge is produced in academia. So we could go deeper into this, but in a way, the message I'm showing you here is that the Chinese assertiveness discourse was initially exaggerated. Nonetheless, it has influenced how China was viewed, and it was influenced negatively. So in a way, China didn't have full control and doesn't have full control. That's good to keep in mind. China and no other country has full control over how it is perceived. So in my book, I also suggested that this situation, in fact, created a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that first the discourse changed, then the countries became more nervous, then also Chinese foreign policy was continuously changing and escalating, and eventually China did become more assertive. Moving to the second era, so the Belt and Road Initiative, you're looking at the first table of the three I will show you. What I did in my research was that I looked at 3 European countries, at Spain, UK, and Poland. I looked at 2 main media, and I tried to find how Belt and Road is discussed in these media. So you're looking at the table from the UK, and you see that mainly the media discourse on BRI articles was quite positive, and mostly it was about economy, especially infrastructure, but also there were quite a lot of political articles. But what is interesting, even political articles were quite positive. Now, the only topic which was relatively negative was security. But you see, firstly, it's not too negative, and secondly, it's very, very marginal. And even geopolitical discussion of BRI initially was not negative, it was very neutral. Now, the situation in the Spain and Poland is pretty similar, and that's good to highlight because sometimes you can hear about Southern Europe or Central Eastern Europe being pro-China. Of course, some countries in these regions sometimes are China-friendly, but overall, in particular in this research, I didn't find anything different in Spain and Poland. So again, looking at Spain, it's pretty similar picture to the UK, mainly positive, very economically driven discourse. Finally, in Poland, very similar. Again, mainly economic, politics, infrastructure, some security and geopolitics is negative, but relatively marginal, and so on. Now, how to read these results and concluding the second era before we move to the third era, which will be the main portion of my talk. There is a lot of discussion about what are the goals of Belt and Road Initiative, but it is acknowledged that probably one of the goals of the BRI was to improve China's soft power abroad. Now, if that was the goal, and there is evidence because People's Daily mentioned that, but also Western observers said that it is likely that was the goal. If that was the goal, based on these findings, we can say that till 2017, when I finished this research, actually China succeeded because China has always tried to present Belt and Road Initiative as an economic initiative, as an initiative which creates opportunities, mainly economic opportunities, but also political opportunities. And infrastructure has been one of the main issues, main topics in the BRI. So in a way, what you see here is that European media pretty much followed this Chinese official discourse. And I'm not showing it here, but also from our research, it appeared that the articles which mentioned BRI were generally more positive about China than the articles on China which did not mention BRI. So in short, with the BRI in the first 4 years, China has managed to improve its image of China, its image in Europe. So why that happened, and to kind of just offer some explanation, because this actually can be also relevant for you in your countries. First of all, when BRI was announced in China, Chinese public diplomacy or diplomacy media really went all out. There was a massive offensive in terms of talking about BRI. I'm sure many of you have participated in BRI conferences and seminars and so on and so on. So BRI was totally everywhere. And China had a relatively coherent narrative. So China was promising opportunities, it was promising win-win, it was promising something which appealed to anyone. It was promising investments in the Czech Republic, unemployment solution in Spain, it was promising infrastructure development in Poland, was promising cooperation in Africa, in UK. Really everyone found something with the BRI. Compared to that, Europeans didn't know what to think initially about this initiative. So there was something which I call here European cacophony, right? So no one was sure. There was some discussion that probably there are some geopolitical implications, but it wasn't clear. Now, in 2017, actually, the European response became clear. And the European diplomats, but also think tanks and so on, started to really highlight that there are geopolitical implications and we are cautious about the BRI. And that's why I focused only on the first 4 years, because actually afterwards, the European discourse would change again, pretty much 180 degrees. And then that may be just not to take too much time. That kind of brings us to the third era, and kind of, let's say, era after 2018, which I called the Chinese influence era, because as many of you will be familiar, as 10 years ago there was Chinese assertiveness discourse. Now Chinese influence is really something which is very predominant when we discuss China. Now, you are looking at the chart, which is built based on our research, our public opinion survey, which we run at Central European Institute of Asian Studies and Czech University, so the two institutes where I'm based. And we have picked 13 European countries, so mainly EU, but also UK, Serbia, and Russia. In each country, we had 1,500 respondents. So overall, we collected about 20,000 responses. And we were asking a lot of things. So of course, here I'm just showing you some very, very basic findings. But the first finding is also similar to what I showed you at the beginning. Europeans are very negative on China. And the most negative is Sweden, followed by Western European countries, also Czech Republic. Pretty much, if you look at this chart, you see the only countries which are positive about China is Russia and Serbia. Obviously, they are not the EU countries. And really, Russia and Serbia, you can see that they have, and also from this chart, you can see how different worldview they have, sort of. All other countries with a little partial exception, Latvia, but all other countries are really very negative on China. Not only that, we asked respondents whether their view of China improved or got worse. And again, you see most respondents say their views of China over previous 3 years got worse. In UK, it was 2/3. Sweden also, most countries have seen kind of worsening of the image of China. So now, why that is the case? So let me offer a few explanations. And again, this is something which you hopefully can relate to your countries, and then we can discuss whether these factors are present there or whether they actually play differently. So first of all, the main reasons why China is perceived so negatively is foreign policy. So Chinese foreign policy is kind of perceived very negatively in Europe, and it's also the main driving force for the negative view. Then there are other factors. So human rights, as I mentioned, very negatively perceived in China, definitely perceived as getting worse over recent years, in particular in relation to Xinjiang, also to developments in Hong Kong. Tibet is always something which is in present. In general, a lot of human rights crackdown in China and so on. What is interesting, what was a bit surprising for me is that Europeans are very negative on Chinese impact on global environment. So, and you will see shortly that actually it really seems that kind of the global environmental policies is something which Europeans have as one of their priority when they engage China. One interesting thing is that Europeans are kind of losing interest, or they're losing hope that engaging China economically is going to bring them a lot of economic benefits. And that's quite remarkable because for 40 years, this was kind of the EU-China relations was really mainly about economy. It was about trade, it was about investment, and we hope that's what is kind of the basis. It is still the basis, but it is important to recognize that the mood in Europe is shifting. And it's shifting away from emphasis on economy to other issues. You might be familiar with the Wolf Warrior label. So that was a Chinese nationalistic movie. And this is kind of applied in recent years to call kind of the Chinese diplomacy becoming quite confrontational. So in a way, totally abandoning this low profile diplomacy and really confronting their hosts, or especially mostly the US and so on and so on. So for instance, as I showed you, Sweden has the most negative view of China. Now, Sweden actually has experienced by far the most of this wolf warrior diplomacy, with the Chinese ambassador in Stockholm being very, very kind of vocal, very controversial, and so on. So you can see that this sort of public, well, it's not really public diplomacy, but this sort of confrontational public image is obviously shifting towards negative impression of China. And of course, the China-West tensions, US-China trade war tensions, this also impacted the negative view of China. Now, there are still some factors which we have analyzed and identified as improving the image, or the positive factors. Some countries in Europe recognize that China helped them during the COVID, especially Italy, but actually also Czech Republic, but also Serbia, Russia. These countries actually recognize that China helped them, and the people who recognize China's help tend to have more positive view of China. Also, people who perceive China's role for their national economy as important, they tend to be more positive about China, and the cultural attraction of China also helps Chinese image. Now, this is just the chart which kind of shows you various aspects. We were asking respondents. So you see, we kind of ask respondents how you feel about different issues. And you see here, Chinese technology was perceived the most positively, while China's impact on the global environment, as I mentioned, most negatively. even more negatively than Chinese military power, China's effect on democracy, and so on. You can see that the trade with China, but especially Chinese investments, are actually perceived less than neutral, so slightly negative. So again, and also the Belt and Road Initiative. So as I said, first 4 years, Belt and Road Initiative probably succeeded in helping China's soft power in Europe. Afterwards, the situation shifted. Just to show you a few more information, we asked people to tell us what is the first association of China. So I'll show you a few word clouds. But actually, by far, the most frequent association in most European countries was the COVID-19. Now, of course, that is something which is a negative thing. This essentially means that people relate the pandemic COVID-19 to China, that it spread from China. So this certainly didn't help China's soft power. As I said, actually, Czech Republic is interesting because in Czech Republic, China is perceived as a communist country. In Sweden, dictatorship was the first association. Again, probably linked to very confrontational style of Chinese diplomacy there. Just so you can look at the word clouds. So these would be Spanish, Italian. You see COVID-19 definitely the most dominant. Besides that, some other patterns or the concepts which appear. Of course, large population, technology, communism, these things appear, but really COVID-19 is absolutely dominant. This would be Czech Republic. So again, you see that actually in the Czech Republic, situation is different. And that's what I mentioned at the beginning, that China doesn't have full control over how it is perceived. So while in most European countries, COVID-19 was the main association, in Czech Republic, it's communism. If you want, we can get into detail in the discussion, but really I want to show here primarily that the perceptions are just, they are influenced not only by China, but also by the local context. Here, this is just the regressive table, but I wanted to show you that foreign policy of China, so it's this one, 0.261, is the most influential from these factors. And it's ahead of quality of life, of human rights, cultural attractiveness. So really, if someone asks me why China is perceived so negatively in Europe, the simplest answer is because of Chinese foreign policy that is perceived negatively. Now, finally, what kind of policies Europeans prefer as a response to this China we're talking about? So interestingly, across the continent, cooperation on global issues, and specifically climate change, epidemics, counterterrorism, this is the most preferred foreign policy towards China, ahead of cybersecurity, promotion of trade and investment. What is interesting, Europeans are not in a mood to engage in geopolitical struggle with China. They don't feel like preventing Chinese geopolitical expansion. But again, this doesn't mean, because sometimes the criticism from the US is that Europe is naive. So I don't think our data show that Europe is naive. As you recall, Europeans are not very optimistic about trade or investment with China. You can see it here. It's not very kind of top policy preference, but really Europeans perceive China as a key global player, and they really see China as someone who has to be engaged when we want to work on issues like global issues, climate change, epidemics, and so on. So I think this is the picture. It's not that Europeans trust China, it's that they just see it absolutely necessary partner to engage on these issues. And this is just basically a different visual expression of that. So maybe I'll finish here. I think I've spoken for about half an hour, as was agreed. And I'm very happy to go in details in many of these aspects. So this, the whole issue of Chinese soft power in Europe, but across different countries, different features, this is something which my colleagues and I have been working on for some time. We published a few articles on that, so we can focus on, more issues. So we, for instance, have an article on European kind of prejudice. So of course, many people in Europe have certain prejudice, even racist prejudice against Chinese people. And this is also there. So that was one thing we studied. Another thing was, as I mentioned, communism, and the history of communism is an important driving factor in Central Eastern Europe, because these countries were communist in the past. And so their memory and their relations with Russia influence how they perceive China nowadays. So that's another option. And then, as I said, Chinese foreign policy, and especially public diplomacy, that's really something which probably is the main driving force of why Europe has turned negative, as I showed. So thanks for your attention for now. Looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for a wonderful and very comprehensive presentation. We have really learned a lot, and we have started receiving lots of questions. Let me go with the first question that I've received on Facebook. Like, Chinese do not have a state religion, and Communist Party and communists are atheists. However, it is said that China is using Buddhism as its soft power. How do you look at it? And that's the first question. Let me say two so that it's easy for you to combine. How successful are the Chinese Confucius institutes in expanding China's soft power?
The first question was about Buddhism, that China uses Buddhism as in its foreign policy, right?
Yes.
I think Chinese foreign policy, public diplomacy is relatively flexible. That means that in Czech Republic, of course, Czech Republic is a very atheist country. So most people here are not following and not practicing any religion. But of course, it's kind of the part of European Christian context. So I haven't noticed that China would be using Buddhism as something to engage Czech Republic, Czech public, or the European public, and so on. So maybe in Nepal, but of course you have maybe, this is maybe something more similar, but in Buddhist countries, Sri Lanka, right, in Southeast Asia, I think over there China will try to engage Buddhism. And then I think it depends how it does it, because of course China has very mixed baggage of its own experience with Buddhism. So on the one hand, China wants to use Buddhism. On the other hand, as you said, communism is an atheist ideology. There are also news about crackdown. Of course, in the past, during Cultural Revolution and so on, Buddhism was under intense crackdown in China. So I think it's a mixed baggage, which kind of depends on how skillfully China can use it, and also how much the receiving countries are willing to trust and engage with China on that. Now, in terms of Confucius institutes, so actually my university hosts a Confucius Institute. Now, I'm not part of it, I'm not engaging, I'm not I don't even know anyone there. But also, that kind of shows me that they are not very effective in influencing or impacting Chinese soft power, because so I live in a small town. This is really 100,000 people small town. There is a Confucius Institute. I've never ever seen anything, what they would be organizing and so on. If you look into Czech media, the only discussion about Confucius Institute is negative. So discussing about, Confucius Institute as potentially security threat, maybe spying, giving China spying options and so on and so on. Now, I think Confucius Institutes are certainly not helping China's soft power. If anything, I think they are kind of making it a little worse, because there is more emphasis on potential threats. It may be different in different countries. So again, I'm interested to hear your experience from your countries. But I think that in the West, Confucius Institutes are not helping Chinese soft power at all. Quite the opposite.
Thank you so much. Let me move to other two questions. There's a question that is the West seeking to decline China's influence and soft power by promoting discourses of death trap diplomacy and hostage diplomacy to shift the discourse from one of Chinese investment to one on security. There's another similar question. Let me club that. When did China start investing in soft power? What are its soft power tools apart from BRI, Confucius Institute, and Buddhism? And third is, how do you look at China's BRI initiative? Is it a death trap or soft power catalyst?
Okay, very interesting question. So the first question, we should definitely not perceive West as one actor. So I'm based in Europe. I definitely see huge differences between Europe, European Union, and the US. So the US in recent years has definitely decided to confront China, right? It really perceives China as a rival, and it kind of takes very confrontational attitude. And it wasn't just Donald Trump, it's the same under Joe Biden. Europe doesn't want to do that. As I showed you also in our survey, Europeans are not interested in geopolitical, preventing geopolitical expansion of China and so on and so on. Europe wants to see China as playing by the rules. Europe doesn't have a problem with China growing, China rising, but Europe has a problem with human rights abuses, with kind of not following international law in South China Sea, for instance, not following the international agreement on Hong Kong, maybe not following the climate change promises. These are kind of the things I think Europe would like to see. So I don't think Europe wants to see China's decline. I think some people, and another thing is that, of course, the West, the liberal democracies are very diverse. So as in a question, you mentioned death trap diplomacy, and in my talk I mentioned Chinese assertiveness. As also I mentioned, very often these memes or discourses are very simplified, and they are very sexy. So when you say China death trap, actually experts have pointed repeatedly that death trap is very, very simplistic narrative. But nonetheless, it's such a catchy narrative that many people accept it and so on. Now, and then of course this leads to kind of the negative attitudes towards China. So now, don't get me wrong, many of Chinese loans are very problematic. I mean, if there is anyone from Sri Lanka, you will know better. Many of the loans, in Montenegro, in Europe, in Ecuador, in Latin America, in Africa, and so on, many of them have some serious issues. But I still think that death trap is very simplistic. So I hope I somehow address this question. And in a way, yes, some actors in the West, they probably want China to decline, and they probably use this sort of narrative, as a tool. I mean, that's why we talk about the narrative struggle, right? China tries to come with its own narrative. Many people, but the difference is that China is a very unified actor. So if China creates one strategic narrative, basically everyone in China more or less follows. You would have Chinese official media, Chinese diplomats, Chinese leaders, Chinese academics, many of them will have to somehow follow as well. But of course, in the West, we are free to say whatever we feel like. So I can say today whatever I think, but maybe someone else has very different goals, and they can also, push their agenda. So I hope that this clarifies the question. What was the second question? What tools China uses for its soft power? Frankly, I don't think Confucius Institutes are a very important tool of China. I don't think Buddhism is a very important tool for China. From my experience, Chinese economy is probably one of the most important kind of the magnet, the factor which, attracts people. I mean, I think that's the reason why people around the world, many people become fascinated because of Chinese economic successes, but also because they can cooperate with China. And this is the discussion about economic opportunities. So in fact, I think this is maybe the biggest kind of the factor of Chinese soft power. And then I think, and this is something maybe I'd be happy if anyone wants to comment, but I think across the developing world, China is very successful in presenting itself as a leader of the developing world, as kind of someone who is against the West. Now, of course, the West has conducted a lot of very troubled business over centuries, with the colonization and so on and so on. Now, of course, China is not part of the West, and China presents itself as kind of helping the post-colonial, non-Western developing world. And I think this is something which is very successful, at least to some extent, but many people are happy to be able to diversify, right? That on the one hand, they have a lot of dealings with the West, because of course, Europe, US still very important, but then they are happy they have China. So they can pick the partners and they can say, okay, the US offers us this, do you have something better? And the vice versa. China offers something, you can go to Europe and say, okay, China gives us this loan, can you give us a better deal? It's always good to have, right, more options to choose, because then you can choose the better one. So I think this would be another tool for Chinese soft power. And I'm sorry, remind me, what was the third question was about the BRI?
Yes, how do you look at China's BRI? Is it the trap or a soft power catalyst?
Very broad question. See, I think in short, BRI is not just economic initiative. It's not just about trade. It's not just about investment, not just about infrastructure building. It's not just about soft power promotion. Don't get me wrong. This talk focuses on soft power, but soft power is just one of many, many features within the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think the easiest and simplest to understand BRI, it is the umbrella under which all Chinese foreign policy is organized. Everything is BRI. Even domestic policies in China are part of BRI. So this is really just an umbrella under which it all comes. So no clear goal. Of course, some strategic vision, building greater China dream and so on, but no more concrete goal. So the umbrella, that's how I would answer it.
Thank you. Let's move to next set of questions. On which areas can China focus on to improve its soft power in Europe in the future? And does China convey soft power through unofficial channels?
Okay, this is a great question. So the first one, I published a commentary recently that you might recall the Chinese President Xi Jinping made this statement that China will stop building coal power plants abroad. Now, I commented that if that is really put in place, this is something which can improve China's soft power in Europe, because as I showed you, Europeans care about environment and they are very negative about China's impact on global environment. So there is a long way for China to prove itself, but if China really improves its environmental impact, I think that can be something how China can have its image in Europe improved. And quite frankly, for Chinese government, it might be easier to improve the environmental impact rather than change some of the political issues. I don't expect Chinese government to be willing to change their position on Hong Kong or Taiwan anytime soon, but and that would of course help, but I don't think they will do it very soon. But the environmental policies, it's also in their interest. They need to deal with air pollution, climate change, and so on and so on. So if they do it, and that's a big if, But if they do it, that can improve the image of China internationally and in Europe. And the second was? The second question? Can you remind?
Second question was, does China convey soft power through unofficial channels?
I mean, the answer is, of course, yes, but I'm not sure what, it's a little broad. I mean, what are unofficial channels? Okay, see, let me say this. China is not the monolith. So it doesn't mean that everyone in China is somehow ruled by one, one state structure. Of course, China is an authoritarian country. Of course, communist power controls. Of course, China, as I said, has very coherent strategic narrative. Of course, Chinese media, Chinese think tanks, they are, they have to follow more or less these lines. But that doesn't mean that everyone, that really there is no freedom at all for various, as this question posed, unofficial channels. So you have academics in China who are actually independent or do some very, very good research, fact-based, and not necessarily just following the state propaganda and so on. So from this perspective, the answer is yes, there are unofficial channels. Maybe someone, there can be Chinese NGOs who are engaging with their partners. And this is interesting because the Chinese government doesn't let their society freely to engage with the international world. But if they do allow, actually this sort of free engagement, this is what helps soft power, right? This is also what Joseph Nye, who coined the term, he was always saying that that for China to improve its soft power, they should let their society be a little bit, free to spread the message, because instead Chinese government makes message so coherent and uniform that it really just sounds a bit too much like propaganda, at least to our ears in Europe. So, and of course, there are also some unofficial channels which are more problematic, right? So there can be, of course, shady deals. Of course, some Chinese actors can be involved in corruption and so on. So, of course, this is also, let's say, unofficial channels. Of course, it can lead to some, improved image of China. And it's happening, obviously. I mean, for instance, in Macedonia in Europe, the prime minister was prosecuted for accepting bribe from a Chinese company for the infrastructure deal. I'm sure this is not the only case. So these things happen as well.
We still have lots of questions and we hardly have around 15 minutes. Let me try to club them together. There is one question how does Chinese soft power work around the world? Is it same tool that is used in Europe, works in Africa or Asia or other parts of the world? Second is, do you think one of the reasons Chinese soft power is waning is because it is shaped by central government as compared to other countries such as US, Japan, South Korea, and Western European countries who rely on private sector and civil society?
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood correctly the question, but let me try. Maybe I'll start with the second question. I think there is a very different understanding of what the soft power is in China, in Europe, maybe in other parts of the world. I think for us in the West, in Europe, in North America, soft power is perceived as something fundamentally, civil society kind of thing. So, in a way, Joseph Nye argued that the US has a lot of soft power, not thanks to the government. Actually, even the government is undermining American soft power, but still people around the world like American culture, American lifestyle, and so on and so on. In other words, it is kind of the civil society driving, controlling the American soft power. I think we have a similar approach here in Europe. Of course, the US and all countries engage in some sort of public diplomacy and so on. But I think soft power is really perceived as more of a civil society thing. Now, China perceives soft power very differently. China perceives it as kind of, first of all, they put a lot of emphasis on culture. So they somehow expect, and as also these questions mentioned, they put emphasis on Confucius Institute, on Buddhism and so on, while I actually do research which shows these are not very efficient soft power tools. They are not really helping that much. On the other hand, as I also mentioned, the reason why many people around the world have positive view of China is not because they love Chinese culture or because they see Chinese lifestyle as so appealing, but they like China because they see it as a source of economic enrichment. And so this is really a little bit something different to what we are talking about, European or American soft power. So I think this is maybe important to recognize that these are different things. And I'm sorry, can you please very quickly remind me the first question of the two?
The first question is like, how does China's software work? Is it the same tool that applies in Africa, works in Europe, works in Asia, in different parts of the world? Or
Sure.
Do Chinese have different tools for different regions of the world?
Yeah, thank you. In short, it's different. I also mentioned it in terms of Buddhism and so on. So of course, China doesn't use Buddhism in its public diplomacy in Europe because we're not Buddhist here. We have different bases. And of course, in Africa, Latin America, China will be putting a lot of emphasis on some kind of shared post-colonial heritage, the third world and so on. So in a way, China is very flexible. I think that is good to recognize that very often China can promise different countries whatever they want to hear. So in Europe or in Central Eastern Europe, where I'm based, many people kind of hoped to become sort of China's gateway to Europe. And, Chinese diplomats, media experts, they were really fine promising this to everyone. Yes, Czech Republic is the gateway, Poland is the gateway, Serbia is the gateway, Greece is the gateway, also Slovenia, everyone's the gateway. And of course, it didn't matter, that it's kind of contradictory. So yeah, the short answer would be it's quite flexible. It really changes.
Sorry, we hardly have 5 minutes, so let me put the last question for today. In case of Chinese engagement with South Asian countries, China has been extensively focusing on comprehensive engagement, including party-to-party relations. Is it also present in European context? Should we link it with the Chinese aim to export ideology and governance model?
I didn't hear all question, but I heard at the end that you asked whether China is engaging in export of its governance model, right?
Yes, it's ideology and government model, because in some countries they have party-to-party relations in South Asia. For example, Nepal we had at one point of time.
Okay, I think it depends on definition a little bit, but my short answer would be that China is not primarily interested in export of its ideology or governance model for a few reasons, but I think mainly, okay, you guys are based in Nepal, I'm based in the Czech Republic. I don't know much about Nepal politics, so let me mention about Czech Republic. There is often discussion here whether China is undermining democracy. I don't think that the Chinese diplomacy has any interest, and whether it matters for them whether Czech Republic is a democratic or not democratic. I think what matters for them is whether Czech Republic is friendly to China, open to engage China, or not. And I would say it's a bit similar in Nepal. Of course, you are bordered to China, you're a neighbor of China, so it might be a little different, but I think for China, primarily, they want Nepal, in your case, to be stable. They want Nepalese government to be friendly towards China, and they don't like surprises. They don't like unpleasant surprises. So that's why they would be engaging with political parties. Also in Czech Republic, as you said, in Nepal, they do it all around the world because they want to have friendly relations with the government. But in case there is a different government, they want to have good relations with everyone. So if there is a government change, they can say, okay, this is a decision of Czech or Nepali people, we respect it, it's totally up to you. But they would hope to have a leader who is friendly towards them. So, and another thing why I don't think they are interested in exporting their ideology is, I don't think they have a very clear ideology. Maybe that's a good thing to mention at the end. Of course, China is ruled by a communist party, but China is not a communist country in terms of communist ideology. China is very much a Chinese, it's very nationalistic, so on. So in this case, what is their ideology? They are not going to make Czech Republic a Chinese state, or they're not going to make Nepal kind of a Confucius country in a way. So in this sense, of course, if their friendly government wants help with face recognition and surveillance, of course they're gonna help. But I don't think that's the same. And of course, we can have some question marks whether that's legitimate, whether we like it or not. But I don't think it's the same as if someone say that they are exporting their ideology, they want to undermine democracy and so on. I don't think that is something which is their primary goal.
Dr. Richard Turcsányi, thank you so much for your time. It was a great learning experience and we learned a lot. I'm sure our audience also immensely benefit from it. We hope to have you again, maybe in real, in Kathmandu or in other parts of the world. We'd also like to thank all our audience for their wonderful questions. Thank you so much and have a nice day.